Good? You know, the Yoga Sutras start out with a, let's not do this, man. It's like too much for me. It's too much of a peripheral vision for me. It's all right. I don't know, but we got to close that door, sir. Thank you. The Yoga Sutras start out Atta Yoganushashanam. Now instruction on yoga. Atta Yoga Anushashanam. So there's a genre of literature called sutra. Sutra means thread. And there was this period in Indian history where schools had become established and there were different worldviews which were being propounded. And those schools had, over a period of centuries and millennia, fleshed out their worldviews. Sometimes people think that Hindus get along with everybody. C.S. Lewis, the author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, said, I should like to get to know a Hindu, get to know what the Hindus believe, but I've never been able to get them to commit to anything. So he would have met some neo-Hindus in England in the 30s or 40s, and they would have just been impersonalists and just sort of gone along with everything, and it's like they're slippery, like Teflon. It's hard to nail them down on anything. Go, make a move. And so it's tough to nail them down on anything because they're a little greasy or something, and they're like Teflon. It's tough to get them to commit to anything. What do you believe? Oh, we believe in everything. Well, I believe in Jesus. Yes, Jesus is very good. Well, Jesus says that you guys are bogus. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. We appreciate everybody. There are many paths, many ways. You get somebody like that and they refuse to commit. Almost like if you are looking for someone to have a relationship with and they refuse to commit to you. Are we an item? Maybe. I don't like to label things. Well, are you with anybody else? I don't think that's a good question for us to be asking each other. We should just focus on the present, on the moment. And so you get people like this in life and they just refuse to be nailed down or tied down. They refuse to label themselves. So C.S. Lewis was obviously encountering a neo-Hindu like that. And he said, I should like to get to know them and find out about their beliefs, but I can never get them to accept or commit to any position. And although you might not know it, C.S. Lewis was quite the theologian. He wrote on religious topics extensively, and actually The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is about Christianity. Covert, the lion represents Christ. And so C.S. Lewis obviously never dealt with any classical Hindus. He only dealt with neo-Hindus who had become expert at this kind of banter. Because if you look at classical Hinduism, it's the earliest instance we have of really serious polemics where different schools of thought coexisted in the same place and competed for patronage and followings. Now, if you look at like the Middle East, which is a very dualistic, us and them society, there's heaven and there's hell, there's God and the devil, there's Jews and Goyim, there's Christians and heathens, there's Muslims and infidels. It's a very tribal religion. The Middle East, which gave rise to 2/3 of the religion of the world, maybe whatever 5/7. It was 5 billion Christians and Muslims put together. So if you look at that little small corner of the world, you're dealing with desert, you're dealing with scarce resources, you're dealing with Bedouin tribes, nomadic tribes. Everybody's in a constant state of warfare for the scarce resources. And you've got these small tribes. And then small tribes war with other small tribes. When you go to India or you go to China, you get these great civilizations. And so whereas you've got this exclusive, my way is the only way, you're either in or you're out, us versus them, and that kind of dualism, when you go to these great civilizations like ancient India or China, they are hierarchically inclusivistic. They were large civilizations that were not in a constant state of war. They were huge kingdoms ruled by emperors with many smaller communities living in harmony with one another. There was no indigenous slavery in India. The only slavery in India was brought in by the Muslims who took over. And even that was relatively recent, in the last 1,500 years. But traditionally there was no slavery in ancient India. They did have indentured servants, but nothing that remotely resembled the slavery that we think of when we think of slavery in the world. And so you've got this huge, big civilization, and people got along. And when people get along and they don't kill you over a difference in beliefs, and different communities have to be honored, and even the caste system, as much as it gets a bad reputation all over the world, there was a guild system in ancient Europe. Sometimes you meet somebody and their name is blacksmith. And that meant that at some point in the village they lived in, their father was a blacksmith, and that was his name. He was Joe the blacksmith, and then his son also became, John Blacksmith. And that's how those names are passed on. Common Indian surnames like Agarwal. Agarwal means grocer, seller of groceries. And so when you look at the evil Indian caste system, you find that it was more like a guild system. There was upward mobility. It wasn't oppressive. But you had some guaranteed employment. And so if your father was a blacksmith, you got to be the blacksmith for the village. Or if your father was a doctor, you got to be the doctor for the village. And you would pass on the job description from parent to child. Generally speaking, it was a patriarchal system from father to son because the men were the breadwinners in traditional societies. And so, when you look at the evil hierarchy, actually, when the Christians invaded India, if you talk to Hindus, that's how they view it. When the Christians invaded India and tried to convert everybody to their Eurocentric way of thinking and living, they won. They were popular, especially if you look like in Kerala. There's lots of Christians in Kerala because the Portuguese, they came around the Horn of Africa and they came up and they hit that west southern seaboard of India, kind of like Baja, California, but for India. And that was Kerala, and so there's lots of Christians in Kerala. Muslims also came that route, so there's lots of Muslims there as well. So they converted them all. And then they tried to make, on this festival days for the saints, they would have all the Christians come together and eat together, have a feast, because that's a big deal. You have a feast for a particular saint. It's a big deal in Catholicism. Not so much here, but if you go back 100 years, 150 years, it's a big deal. The feast days for the saints. It's like the whole calendar is filled with that. Anyway, they tried to make a feast day, and all the Hindus converted back to Hinduism. All the Christians converted back to Hinduism because they didn't want to eat in the same room with people from another caste. And so the Pope actually had to issue a decree that's there a couple hundred years ago, allowing for the Hindus of India, this is during the Renaissance period, to continue to observe their caste regulations because it was so important to that community that they would convert to become Christians, but they wouldn't give up that system of stratification within society. And there's a reason for that. I mean, you have endogamous and exogamous relationships within the caste system. And so you have relationships within your own community. And then you have relationships with other communities, and they're guaranteed. So you're guaranteed a certain amount of seats in parliament, you're guaranteed a certain voice in the government, you're guaranteed a certain job description, you're guaranteed certain farming lands, certain temples are yours. And so just by being born into a particular guild, you get a bunch of resources which will save your family from starvation. You get to marry people from this community, you get to go to these temples, you get this voice in government. Interestingly, Ambedkar was the first Chief Justice, Supreme Court Chief Justice of India, the top judicial person in India. He was from a Dalit caste, and he was untouchable. And if you look at the Indian Constitution and the Indian government now, their system of reservations is so progressive, it makes our affirmative action look like almost antediluvian, pre-slavery, pre-abolition of slavery. The affirmative action that goes on in India is so unbelievably progressive. For instance, there are seats in governments for all of the various scheduled castes and tribes, is how they refer to it. And oftentimes you'll have people from Brahmin caste immolating themselves, burn themselves to death on college campuses because they have like a 5.0 grade point average. But somebody with a 3.0 grade point average gets their seat in college because the Brahmin's from the wrong caste and their quota's all used up, and the other person's from a lower caste, and so they get an automatic seat in college. And it's so bad because it takes away opportunities. It's no longer a meritocracy, that there's all these rebellions going on all the time because people who are eminently qualified because they got born into a high caste are not allowed to move forward. And you have the Adivasis, the indigenous tribes of India, get a certain amount of seats in the government and in parliament, and they're represented. And I mean, imagine if we were to say the Senate has to have X amount of seats for African Americans. There have to be X amount of black senators at all times. There have to be X amount of Mexican or Latino senators at all times. You follow? Or X amount of Pacific Islander senators at all times in our government. It's really heavy. They've had Muslims as prime ministers, even though Muslims make up 10% of the population. They've had women prime ministers back in the 60s. When you look at the progressiveness of India as a country and how they've embraced a lot of socialist values and what would be considered, liberal values, it's impressive. We're still catching up. We're still catching up. We haven't had a female president yet. They had one in the 60s. Within 20 years of winning independence from the British. So, despite that, the caste system is still alive and well in India. Because no matter how many laws they've passed, no matter how much they try to get rid of it, and they've been trying like anything since the inception of India as an independent country, as a sovereign nation. Poverty is a real thing in India, and if you're from a particular caste, you have a certain way you can make money, and you're allowed that in the village. Certain jobs, certain services belong to you and your community, and they can't be taken away from you. It's even enshrined in law. It's not just pure capitalism. Maybe it's not legally enshrined, although there is legally enshrined. Like when we go up to that village Mon, when we just go out right outside of Badrinath, the last village, those people, get to walk into China when they want to. And they are given a ton of government subsidies to be able to do their thing and have their village, because they're an indigenous community. Kind of Chinese, Indian, whatever it is, Sino-Indo people, mountain people, almost like the India's version of Tibetans. And unlike in China, where Tibetans are discriminated against very, very heavily, in India they're protected. You go to the village, and they've got all these government contracts and all these government subsidies that protect their community and allow them to live their traditional way of life. So you get these great civilizations, these great hierarchical civilizations, and there might be stratification. There might be, people are vying for power and resources, but they're not just killing each other off and enslaving each other and fighting really grim and grotesque battles for dominance. So when you look at tribal religion from the Middle East, which is what Occidental religion is, Islam and Christianity, Western religion, there's a certain sociological framework, a certain mindset, us versus them, exclusivism, my way is the right way. You either convert by the book or we kill you by the sword. There's very much this mentality, because it's the mentality of the people before they took to a particular version of spirituality. When you look at India, you have a great civilization that lived largely in harmony, much like China. And so although there might have been some squabbling and there might have been some little small wars, there were huge chunks of relative peace in the greater Indian subcontinent, with people from many different communities living together. They would still vie for control or position, jockey for position, but it would not be where they would decry somebody else as evil or outside or heterodox or apostates. And there wasn't this kind of sharp condemnation and this radical dualism that you find in the West. And so you see within India that there was this really rich polemical culture where people debated. And you had different schools of thought. And they codified their school of thought, and they did battle with other schools of thought, and they adopted things from the other school and borrowed freely and found very, very fine points of contention. Whereas, Christians have to just completely separate themselves from the Jews and try to run away from the fact that their entire religion is built on the Jewish sacrificial culture. Did you guys follow that? If you look at Christianity, the entire religion is built on the Jewish sacrificial culture. Jesus was the sacrificial lamb. The whole motif of the Paschal lamb is retained. The entire Jewish tradition is retained. It's just moved from animal sacrifice to human sacrifice. And the extirpating of sins has gone from, for 1 year, to all of civilization. Although you might learn about Christianity and never realize how intimately linked Christianity is to its Jewish predecessor. How much it owes. That the Old Testament itself is the bulk of the Torah translated into Greek and then into English. You grow up a Christian and not even know this stuff. How indebted. In fact, if you want to learn about all sorts of stuff in Christianity, you have no choice but to study the Jewish text, because so much of Christian philosophy comes from the Old Testament, and so therefore it's straight Judaism. And a lot of times you'll see rabbinic scholars saying, the Christians have no idea what they're talking about here. They don't read Hebrews. They have no idea what our texts say. Did you follow this? In India, it's really common that you might have a mortal enemy, not literally, mortal is in quotation marks. You might have your arch enemy. But you have all sorts of points you agree on with them and all sorts of things you borrow from each other, and there's a ton of cross-pollination because you're part of this great civilization, and therefore you're given permission to borrow from others. It becomes an argument for completeness or a grand unified theory. Instead of an argument of good versus evil or right versus wrong, it becomes an argument about who can do it better. You guys are 80%, we're 90%. You guys are good, we're better. You guys are better, we're the best. It becomes an argument for completeness or comprehensiveness. And so you almost have to borrow things from the other tradition because you have to show that whatever they have, you have, and you have more. Did you guys follow this? It's a whole different mindset. So anyway, C.S. Lewis couldn't have an argument with a Hindu because he never met a good old-fashioned Hindu, because if you look at Hinduism, it was the original culture in the world that had this rich tradition of polemics because people weren't breaking out a gun and shooting people for what they believed. It's like the Wild West was wild because we just got done with the Civil War and everybody hated each other and was just shooting each other 5 minutes before, and small arguments would turn into gunfights because you might have been fighting a few years ago in the Civil War against each other. But in India, you would have these incredible debates that lasted centuries, and nobody was getting killed over it. And people were borrowing stuff from each other. So anyway, there's this genre of literature called sutras. Sutra means thread. And it was this body of literatures where they would make these short little aphorismic statements, aphorisms, tiny, terse, minimal grammatical statements, like Atta Yoga Anushasana. Anushasana means instruction on yoga. Now begins instruction on yoga. Now follows instruction on yoga. Yoga's Chittavritti Nirodha. Yoga's Chittavritti Nirodha. Yoga is the ceasing of the fluctuations of the mind. Tada Sarupe Vastana. At that time, you can stand in your own self. These really short statements, very short statements about the nature of reality. And they did that as mnemonic devices, so you could memorize a few hundred of these statements, and the entire philosophy would be encoded within a few hundred short half sentences. Then you would spend years of your life learning what each word in the sentence meant, how it all flowed together, and you would learn to read that cryptic language and you'd be able to understand it, but the mnemonic devices of the verses would awaken and impregnate that knowledge within you, so you were able to recall it at any time. It's called the Sanskrit effect. It's studied nowadays. People who study Sanskrit and memorize verses end up having more neural connections in their brain, and it staves off against Alzheimer's and senile dementia and things like that. And they've studied within communities that memorize Sanskrit verses young in life, there's almost no instance of Alzheimer's disease or senile dementia. You can Google it. It's called the Sanskrit effect. Like neurologists have studied this. So there's this whole sutra genre of literature. Our sutra is the Vedanta. It starts out, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now, right now, inquire about Brahman. Then Brahman is defined in the next verse. Jamadi Yase Yataha. Brahman is that thing from which everything comes. Shastra Yonidva. To understand it, you have to read the scriptures. So there's our Vedanta, Atato, now, right now, Brahma Jigyasa, inquire about Brahman. The Yoga Sutras, Atta Yoga Anushasana, now, instruction on yoga. But the parent of all of these, the original sutra literature, is the Mimamsa Sutras. And it starts out, Atato Dharma Jigyasa, now, right now, inquire about Dharma. And although the Gita ultimately teaches bhakti, theism based on the belief in an all-good, all-powerful deity that's available for the price of a song, that's open to helping you at every moment, and that an intimate, loving relationship with divinity is the goal of life. Although the Gita teaches that, a lot of the Gita is about Dharma. A lot of the Gita is about Dharma. And there's a verse, there's only 2 verses in the Gita which are repeated twice, and this is one of them. And so there's a verse, Shreyan Swadharma Viguna. Shreyan Swadharma Viguna. Better your own duty faultily. Paro Dharma Swanushtita. Than performing another's Dharma really well. Better to do your own duty, your own Dharma, faultily, than to do somebody else's Dharma really well. This verse shows up twice in the Gita. And I was thinking about this verse on the way up, and I wanted to talk about it. So that was all a long-winded way of giving you guys a brief education on the history of India and the caste system and the Indian system of reservations for scheduled castes and tribes, and why the caste system is so difficult to get rid of and how it's akin to the guild system. We still have caste systems here. It's why people with college degrees get better jobs than people without college degrees. It's why there's old money and new money. It's why you get to go to your parents' alma mater, because they earn that right and they can get you in. It's why it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's why justice is available for those who can afford it. There's all sorts of, so we get a caste system here. It's why black people get sentenced to 16% more time for the same crime. It's why men get sentenced to 60% more time for the same crime compared to women. Ouch. It's why 94% of workplace-related injuries are men, 78% of suicides are men. There's all sorts of ways in which the deck is stacked for and against this person, that community. We might not call it that, and it might not be, enshrined in law, but it's still there. You just have to know where to look. It's why the Jewish community takes care of itself. That's its own caste system, all over the world. Just hiring your friends. If you hire your friends for jobs, give them opportunities, but your friends all happen to be your race, and it just becomes, it's not even discrimination, because it's not based on race, but it just ends up being nepotistic and ends up elevating or maintaining one community and not another. Warren Buffett's, one of his interests just got accused and charged with redlining. The process of giving more favorable loans to people of certain races. It's, stereotyping people, racial profiling people for better or worse loans. Something that was legal in this country up until the 60s. When it got outlawed, and which affected generational wealth, especially for the African American community. Especially the black community suffered because of that. Because people put money in their homes, pass it on to their children, and so if the government won't guarantee your loans and get you a low interest loan, then you can't buy a home, you can't maintain your home, it can be taken away from you, and you got nothing to pass on to your children. And so it really affects wealth generationally. Anyway, there's all sorts of evil little casteist policies all over the world in whatever place you live. But what I wanted to really talk about was this idea of Dharma. Specifically, I want to talk about Dharma as being purpose. People want to find their purpose. Why was I born? Why was I put here? What do I have to contribute to the world? What are my unique skills and talents? How am I supposed to use them in life? How can I best participate? How can I best contribute to the world? How can I make money? What should I do with my life? What should be my life's work? What should be my legacy? Dalen just got on my case a couple of days ago. I'm just remembering now. How come we never talk about my Dharma? We talked about Dharma with everybody else. It's because I'm black? He didn't say that last part. He didn't say the last part. I just couldn't resist. He's like, why do you talk to everybody else about Dharma except for me? And I'm like, bro, you were sleeping on couches. And you can have a job. We gotta go in order. I gotta keep you above the poverty line. I gotta keep you housed. I gotta keep you just, you know what I mean? And then once we get there, I mean, can I say what I said to you? I had to keep you from couch surfing so you wouldn't get homeless. And I had to keep you from like suffering, dying from your mental health issues. And then you had girl troubles. And we had like 1, 2, 3, and I'm knocking them down. It's like whack-a-mole with you. And as soon as you get a little stable, then we'll start talking about your Dharma. And anyway, to a large extent, Dharma for us, we teach Sanatan Dharma. We teach your Sana Dharma, your eternal Dharma, your old Dharma, your original Dharma, which is the same for everybody. We teach you to chant, follow our lifestyle. And that's your Dharma for everybody. Any other Dharma you do is a lesser Dharma, a smaller Dharma. And so we work on that stuff. But eventually we got to start to talk about what are you going to do for your career? What are you going to do for money? What's going to be your big gift to the world? What's going to be your legacy? What are you going to leave behind for the next generation? What's your call? What's your calling? What's your great service in this lifetime? How are you going to contribute to the betterment of the universe, of the world, to your community, to your fellow man and woman? What's special about you? What's unique about you? What unique gifts do you have, and how are you going to package them to offer them to the world? How are you going to have a fulfilling career? How are you going to stay in the zone? How are you going to not do something you hate and be depressed? How are you going to find your purpose? Mark Twain said the 2 most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. He was talking about finding your purpose. That's what I want to talk about today. Dharma comes from Dri. It means to hold. So where you get words like Giridhari from, the holder of the mountain, which is the name for Krishna. And so Govardhanadhari, that's where you get these Gadadhar, holder of the club, it's the name for Vishnu. And so this all comes from the Sanskrit root Dri, and that's where the word Dharma comes from. There was an earlier work called Rita, which is used in the Rig Veda to refer to the cycle of life and receiving and giving back in a great cycle of life. That word became Dharma in the later Sanskrit literature, like the Puranas, like the Gita. And so Dharma means that which holds your existence. What makes you you? So the Dharma of snow is to be cold, the Dharma of fire is to be warm and give light. It's what makes something itself. It's the intrinsic quality of something that is innately part of the existence of that thing. You can say fire burns, and it's not redundant. You don't just have to say fire. You can say fire burns. So burning and giving light is a quality of fire, but it's a quality of fire which is so innate that it's semi-inseparable from the existence of fire. There's no such thing as cold fire. Although we do say cold fury, but anyway, there's no such thing as cold fire. There's no such thing as warm snow. Warm snow is water. So Dharma is the quality of something, which can be referred to as the attribute or quality or function or duty of that thing. But it's the thing which makes it itself. King Lear says, "If I love you, my people not, then chaos has come." That the duty of the king was to love his subjects. If the king wasn't loving and taking care of his subjects in a paternal relationship, then the whole world is rent asunder. And so this idea that everything has its purpose, it goes back to Scala Naturae, and it goes back to the old world, the world of Aristotle, and pre-Christianity really, and this idea that everything was perfectly put into a logical world by a creator. This stuff shows up in the great chain of being early in Christianity. It was adopted by the Catholic Church before those works were found out to be apocryphal, interpolated. And so this idea that everything has a purpose, it's teleological. It's based on this worldview that everything has an innate purpose and you can find that purpose. Not everybody believes this. There's people who believe everything is random and chaotic, and so there is a, Iago, from Othello says, I don't believe in a God of kings, I believe in a God of knaves. Diderot said, I won't be happy until the last priest is strangled, the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. There was a great move towards breaking down all hierarchical structures. Hierarchy means sacred order. And just having the world be an absolute playing field. But the world's not a playing field because everybody has unique talents. Right off the bat, men are what compared to women? I know that men are stronger than women, because strong is it's a pretty generic term. Try giving birth to 6 kids. See how strong you are.
Stronger upper bodies.
Huh?
Have stronger upper bodies.
They have more upper body strength than women. Undeniable, just because of the difference in breast tissue and pectoral muscles, mammary glands, the ability to lactate. So men have more upper body strength than women, which of course translates into men are more capable of violence. Yeah. Now you could equalize that. You give somebody a gun, and all of a sudden they are the toughest person in the room. Problem is, you give a police officer a gun, and they're weak, and then they have to pull out their gun to show they're the toughest person in the room. They just introduced lethal force, and then if somebody calls their bluff, they have to shoot them. Do you follow this? Creates a problem. If every time there's a problem, the police officer is weak, and the criminals are strong, then the cop has to deploy his weapon. Once he deploys a weapon, he's now introduced a threat of lethal force. And what happens if somebody keeps walking towards them? Then they get killed. And then every encounter becomes a lethal encounter. Not a potential lethal encounter, but the moment the police officer deploys his gun, it becomes a lethal encounter. Ronnie Coleman, the winner of the Mr. Olympia, I think 7 or 8 years running. He was a police officer in Houston. He was so big. It's like 300 pounds. He was so big. And so I remember watching a video of him when I was a kid as a police officer. And he would go to, on these domestic violence calls. And he'd come rocking up to the house. He was so big. He was like, it's almost inhuman how big he was. Like he wouldn't fit through a door. He has to turn to the side to walk through a door. So he'd show up at the house and everybody would be like, hey, what can we do for you, officer? Please take us away. This is the value. Of course, he couldn't run very fast. So that was you gotta have several police officers in the car. That's like the little dude who can run fast and the big dude who intimidates everybody. You can look at somebody's body and you can understand something about what they can do. You can look at someone's mind and understand something about what they can do. We do this when you do a vocational testing in high school. This aptitude testing in high school, they're trying to figure out, okay, what's your thing? What are you good at? Everybody's good at something else. It's like fingerprints. No one's you. Everybody's unique. Everybody's individual. And so you got to spend some time. You got to look at yourself and how you tick. What happened in your early childhood, when you were a kid, when your psyche was forming, when your self-esteem was forming. What moves you? What are you ultimately searching for in life? That stuff's all found in your family of origin. What happened to you when you were a little kid? Essentially, how did your parents mistreat you? And what, therefore, are you searching after for the rest of your life to make yourself complete? You got to start with that. That gets into these real primordial drives. You can go even earlier than that. You can go back to genetics. The body you got. Sometimes you see people and they're giants. They didn't earn that body in the gym. They got that body dealt to them by the deck of life. They got superior genes. You look at like a world's strongest man contest, it's a bunch of Icelandic people. They're all from Iceland. With, you know what I mean? With funky names. Norse Viking names. You ever notice that? You go to, you watch the world's strongman contest, like 40% of competitors are from Iceland. You almost never see a black dude win the world's strongest man contest. It's like these white Northern European, blue-eyed Vikings. They're just like 6'8", 350 pounds, just normally. That's just what they're walking around weight, like with a six-pack, 350. They start working out, they're 420. And there's a whole race of them just walking around up there, giants. Just want to leave them up there. We don't want them coming over here. I mean, you look at like the best runners in the world. The best runners in the world are all what color? Black. It's Kenya, Jamaica, probably from Kenya, West Africans that came over to Jamaica. Best runners in the world, crushing everybody. Really long legs, run like gazelles. You can look, you can see genetics deals people certain physical attributes. And your parents dealt you a certain hand too. That's another one. You got dealt a certain hand by your parents. You got to have some rigorous honesty. Look at your body. Look at your mind. Look at what you're good at. Look at what comes natural to you. Look at what you like doing. Look at what you need to do. Sometimes not even what you like doing. A lot of times you meet people and they like doing something which is totally not their nature, but they don't actually like doing it because they need to do the other thing. Did you follow that one? Like, I'd like it if I didn't have to protect anybody. But in the moment there's danger, you just have to leap into the breach. Can't help yourself. I'd like it if other people could take care of that, but then the moment that happens, you have to leap into the breach. So you got to look at the hand you were dealt with your genes. You got to look at the hand that you were dealt by your family. And then you got to look at yourself and your value system. And add that to the equation. And be honest about it. Well, and the whole I don't like to work too hard, that doesn't count. That's just laziness. You got to get rid of that. You don't get to pull that one. Well, I just like to do very little and just have other people serve me like minions. I feel like I was born in the wrong time and I should have been like a princess in the Victorian age. I just like to look at beautiful things and touch nice fabrics and have people serve me. I was doing couples counseling once, and the woman said that in the couples counseling, and I was like, "You're crazy. You're insane. Look, this is ridiculous. You need to be medicated." I actually had somebody say this to me in couples counseling. I'm not making this up. This is from the vault. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to stretch. You're going to have to grow. It's going to be painful. You're going to have to suffer. Those things are they come along with this body. But what are your natural attributes? You good at math? You good at English? What comes natural to you? What's easy? What kind of body you got? What was growing up like? What are your drives? By owning all that, it doesn't own you anymore. By owning all that, it creates space. You can start to look at that and determine how much of that you want to let affect your life, and you can start to work on it. Create some distance between your rearing, your childhood, and your current life. Otherwise, you just end up repeating the same pattern over and over again. You don't even notice it. And then you start to think, what kind of habits do I want to cultivate? How do I want to grow? What do I want to do? What is it about me that makes me me? And usually you can look back at your childhood and you can see the threads of who you are were always there. What you were interested in. What came natural. What you excelled at. You can find that stuff and then you build a career out of that. Sometimes you got to clean up some of the areas where you're weak so you don't have a massive deficit. Everybody's got to work on empathy. Everybody's got to work on compassion. Everybody's got to work on finding their voice. So if you end up being a people-pleasing type personality, you got to work on finding your voice. You end up being a rebel, you got to work on empathy. Everybody's got to clean up so they have a broad spectrum of qualities they can bring to life that are necessary attributes for any human being to have, any progressive, any successful human being to have. But then alongside that, Renaissance man exercise of becoming well-rounded, you got to find what you're good at and explore that. Are you a teacher? Do you love studying? Like Dom told me today. He says, yeah, I could just study all day. Not everybody's like that. Raise your hand if you can just study all day. It's not that common. It's 1 in 20. 1 in 10, 1 in 10, 1 in 20. There's going to be a few people in every room that can just study all day. Who can work out all day? Raise your hand. I don't believe any of you. I only believe him. How many burpees can you do?
At least I'll do it for 30 minutes straight.
He was the maximum security, high desert prison burpee champion. Did 1,000 burpees in an hour and 45 minutes. That's 10 burpees a minute every 6 seconds for an hour and 45 minutes straight. What is it, Trace Pulmonia? 3 lung. 3 lung. When you're winning the CrossFit award for the fittest man in Supermax, you're a cut above. So I'm sure all you guys are in great shape. I'm not doubting that. I'm not trying to emasculate anybody or effeminate anybody, or no problem. But I just want to give a little love to my boy here. I mean, his Instagram page is level 4 burpees. He's doing like those Navy SEAL burpees. Like where there's like 18 things you're doing all at once, and then you do that's like 1 rep. I couldn't believe it when I saw the kind of burpees you do. I'm like, I thought you were lying to me. And then I realized, oh man, you're that guy. Yeah. So there's not, whatever. Let's just give everybody, like I said, I won't offend anybody, but let's give everybody the award, the fittest man award, no problem. Or fittest woman award. But in any room, there's only a couple people like that. Who loves listening to other people? Could do it all day. Yeah, there's only so many of you in every room. You get it? You got to start to do this. So number 1, look at the hand you were dealt. Some of that's your genes. Your size, your height, some of that stuff is just, it's just your physical attributes, and then there's some of the stuff that's genetic is inborn as well, your mental attributes. So you got to look at that, and you got to look at the next layer is what your parents did to you, and therefore what you're searching after your whole life. That's a big one. Most people never do that. Most people never figure that one out. What makes you tick? What are the patterns you repeat over and over again in your life with different people? Why do you always wind up with the same kind of people, doing the same kind of things? Have you guys ever noticed that? That's layer number 2. And only by noticing layer number 2 do you have any chance of breaking free from it. And then layer number 3 is, what are my value systems? What am I cultivating in this life? What's important to me? How's this stuff all manifesting? And you find your career from that. By looking inward, you figure out what you're meant to do. And that's your Dharma. And so Krishna makes a really far out point. Better do your own Dharma falsely, because it might not come easy. There might be some suffering involved. You might have to grow. You might have to break free from some shackles. You might have to break free from some conditioning to really become who you can be, to be all that you can be. And somebody else's Dharma, you might fit into that easily. It might have been what you were born into. It might have been easy. It might have come your way. It's like, put food on the table. It's easy. But that's for somebody else. It's not for me. A caste system is only a caste system if it's used to oppress people. If you have an opportunity based on the family you're born into, that's not a caste system. It becomes a caste system when nobody else has that opportunity. You follow? When your birth disqualifies you. And a lot of times you end up doing somebody else's Dharma because it's what your parents want you to do, because it's what can pay the bills, because it's what comes easy to you, but it's not you at your best. It's you at your worst. It's deleterious. It's degenerative. And so I was thinking about the concept of Dharma and how the Gita is largely a text on Dharma. And this statement in the Gita that occurs twice. And how challenging it is and how terse it is. Better your own Dharma faultily than another's perfectly. And why that idea has value. And then I thought about this, how there's this whole sutra Dharma, sutra literature, and how the original sutra was Atato Dharma Jigyasa. That was a precursor to Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Did you know that? Yeah. That the Purva Mimamsa gave rise to the Uttara Mimamsa. You've read the Mimamsa Sutras?
No, I'm sure. Okay. The same phrase.
Yeah. And I thought about, well, how do you discover your Dharma? And I want to give you guys a few hacks so you can start to think about it. And this is my answer to your question. But if you can't look back at your childhood, and you can't look back at your genetics, and you can't look at your value system, you don't have a value system, and you can't live up to your value system, and you can't cultivate good habits, and you can't keep your head above water, then we can't do the Dharma thing. We got to do the survival thing. And when you got to survive, you can't do your Dharma. Because you got to put food on the table. Because you're going to be homeless. So it's like you take that job, whatever that job is. You got no choices because you just got to stay afloat. Once you get afloat, once you get a little stable, then you can start to think about these deeper things. We say money is the root of all evil. You know what's even more the root of all evil than money? Poverty. Because, what wouldn't you do to feed your children? Would you kill somebody to feed your children? Interesting question, isn't it? Would you lie? Would you cheat? Would you steal? Would you rob? Would you kill to feed your children? My boy here is just like, yep. Everybody else is like, giving me the deadpan poker face. They're not showing me the hand. Yeah, the two of you were just like, yep, sign me up. Right? The captain in the military and the convict. And I say that term with respect. Not a criminal, a convict. You got to get over that animalistic phase of survival. That, first of Maslow's phases, where you just have to satisfy your basic needs of life. Only once you do that can you start to think about these deeper topics. So first thing is get stable, then we got room. First thing is get over your terrible addictions that are going to ruin your life. Then we got room. Once we get you over your terrible addictions that are ruining your life, once we get you over the poverty line, then we got a little bit of room to think. And then we can start to talk through it. And start to look at what your Dharma might look like, what comes natural to you, what you've always been interested in. You were into writing since you were a kid, right? It's always been there, right? Yeah. You were into protecting others since you were a kid, right? Looking out for your siblings, right? Since you were a kid. Yeah. You got to start to think it through and connect. It's very powerful when you do that. That narrowing of your horizon is like a portal, and I'll finish with this point, that opens you up to a really rich and fulfilling world that's made just for you. You don't have to be a doctor and a lawyer and a princess and the king of England and a this and a that. You can, or a unicorn. You can narrow your focus a little bit, and then that narrowing of your focus on this basis opens a portal, which is almost unlimited because it's you. It's what you were put here to do. It all feels natural. It's all home. And you get empowered, and then you can work hard, and then you can stay motivated, and then you never run out of gas. And then you're excited every day, and you work 7 days a week, and you feel like you never worked a day in your life. And you get in the zone, and time just disappears, and you make rapid progress, and you can be successful, and you're a master. Okay, thank you, IGTV. Any comments?